His Swiss watch gleamed on his wrist, reflecting the light from the crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling of his mansion. He walked across the immense room with firm steps, as if every expensive rug was made solely to support his arrogance. Imported cars sat in the garage, symbols of an empire built on cold calculation. At the dining table, luxurious dishes were served, but no smiles filled the room. His life was a display of power, but without any human warmth. To him, every person had a price, and anyone could be bought. Friends were merely convenient associates, and even family boiled down to contracts and appearances. His arrogance was his fuel, and his pride a shield against any emotion. He believed money guaranteed him immortality, respect, and absolute control. People didn't admire him, they feared his presence. But for him, that was enough. In his imposing office, with its marble walls and panoramic view of the city, he met with business leaders and politicians. In a cold voice, he gave orders that changed destinies without a second thought. Every decision was driven by profit, never by compassion. Those who dared to challenge him were crushed by the force of his wealth. He took pleasure in seeing others bow down. That was the game that excited him the most. Despite his wealth, the millionaire lived surrounded by solitude. There were no sincere hugs, no spontaneous laughter. Everything in his life was by the book, a theater of vanities. He didn't realize it himself, but his soul was empty, covered by layers of gold and arrogance. He slept on silk sheets, but his dreams were barren, without color or tenderness. Each morning he woke up even further removed from humanity. Employees moved through the mansion like shadows, always in silence. No one dared to look him in the eye for too long, afraid of his anger. The millionaire didn't see human beings, he only saw cogs that kept his machine running. To him, everyone was replaceable. Loyalty didn't matter. The smallest mistake was enough for someone to be let go. Respect was demanded, never earned. Stepping into his private elevator, he adjusted his tie with military precision. His reflection in the mirror showed a successful man, but one hardened by coldness. His face knew no tenderness, only superiority. For him, the world was divided into two groups, those who gave orders and those who obeyed. He believed he was eternally destined for the first group. With every meeting, his reputation for arrogance grew. Stories of his harshness circulated through company hallways, fueling fear and submission. Many secretly hated him, but no one dared to confront him. He seemed unshakable, like a fortress built of numbers and contracts. And that fortress kept out any possibility of genuine affection. Even at social events, his demeanor was the same. Fake smiles surrounded him, applause followed his speeches, but deep down, everyone knew he was just a tyrant in an expensive suit. While toasting with crystal glasses, he didn't realize he was merely tolerated. His power bought him attendance, but never anyone's heart.
That night, sitting in his leather armchair, he looked out at the illuminated city. The glow of the lights seemed to confirm his dominion over everything around them. But deep down, there was an unsettling emptiness that he didn't know how to name. He ignored it anyway. For him, weakness was unacceptable. His world was made of iron, and his armor was money. He fell asleep surrounded by luxury, believing nothing could shake his position. But fate, silent, was already preparing the first crack in his fortress, a crack that would appear where he least expected it, in the gaze of a humble employee he didn't even consider important. If you also believe that arrogance always meets its limit, subscribe to the channel now and follow this story to the end. You will be surprised. Among the many invisible faces in his company, there was one employee who stood out for his quiet dedication. He worked long hours without complaint, enduring the pressure and the boss's humiliations. He never raised his voice, but his firm posture showed dignity. While others tried to flatter the millionaire, he just did his job with honesty. His simplicity contrasted sharply with the grandiosity of his surroundings. He was a man of humble origins who had struggled greatly to get that job. Every paycheck, however modest, was used to support his family and ensure his children had better opportunities. He didn't dream of wealth, but of dignity. For him, loyalty and hard work were worth more than any fortune. Yet, he was treated as disposable. One day, in a meeting, the millionaire decided to display his arrogance in an even crueler way. In front of other employees and clients, he humiliated the man with harsh words. He told him he was insignificant, that he could easily be replaced. The scene was met with awkward laughs and downcast eyes. The employee just lowered his head, swallowing the pain in silence. The humiliation echoed through the hallways, but he didn't retaliate. He continued his work as if nothing had happened, even though his heart was wounded. He knew arguing was useless against such a powerful man. All he had left was patience and the strength not to be corrupted by the same arrogance. His silence, in essence, was his greatest act of resistance. While the millionaire boasted about his superiority, the employee reflected on the fragility of life. He saw a profound emptiness in the boss's eyes, even though he pretended to be unshakable. He felt no hatred, but compassion. He knew that man, behind the mask of power, was a prisoner of his own arrogance. And in silence, he promised he would never become like him.
Despite the humiliation, the employee remained loyal. Many wondered why he didn't just quit. The answer was simple. His family depended on him, and need spoke louder than pride. His true strength lay in his ability to endure without losing his essence. That's what set him apart from the millionaire. That same night, the millionaire, indifferent to the damage he had caused, was celebrating another business victory. The employee, on the other hand, went home exhausted, but found strength in his children's smiles. While the boss drowned himself in glasses of wine and silence, the employee was rejuvenated by the warmth of a simple but loving home. The scene of the humiliation, however, would not be forgotten. It planted the seed for a future encounter that would forever change the destinies of both men. The millionaire had no idea that one day his life would depend on the very man he had publicly scorned. The employee possessed an inner strength that no one noticed. This strength, forged through years of struggle and humility, would be the key that fate would use at the right moment. A key that would open doors the millionaire could never have imagined. One man's contempt had been sown, but the other's forgiveness and loyalty were quietly growing. Two opposite worlds, about to collide in an unexpected way, were destined to transform each other. The millionaire believed his fortune was indestructible, but the first signs of instability began to appear. A risky negotiation with foreign investors brought unexpected tensions. Small calculation errors, once irrelevant, now became serious flaws. Still, he maintained his superior posture, convinced that nothing could bring him down. The meetings grew increasingly tense. Some partners questioned him discreetly, but were quickly silenced by his arrogance. "I'm the one in charge here," he would repeat firmly, as if his word was law. His blind faith in his own judgment prevented him from seeing the dangers growing in the shadows. The wall of numbers was beginning to crack. Meanwhile, the humble employee continued his routine, aware of the approaching chaos. He noticed errors in the reports and tried to discreetly point them out, but he was always ignored. The millionaire saw him as insignificant, incapable of contributing to important decisions. Yet that limited view would be his greatest weakness. Outside the office, rumors spread through the city. Investors talked about potential downturns. Journalists looked for cracks to expose. The empire of luxury, once unbeatable, was under attack. Still, the millionaire refused to believe anyone could threaten his position. To him, it was nothing but envy. At a gala event one night, while showcasing his power, he received an urgent phone call. A crucial deal had been sabotaged and millions were at risk. For a moment, his expression lost its mask of arrogance, but he quickly composed himself, feigning calm. He would never admit weakness in front of others.
The employee, seeing the tension written on his boss's face, realized that a fall was inevitable. He kept his concern to himself, but deep down he felt that soon this man would face the greatest challenge of his life, and perhaps it would be in that very moment that their paths would cross in an unexpected way. The millionaire began to notice subtle changes. People who used to approach him with smiles were now quietly keeping their distance. Invitations became fewer, phone calls more rare. His confidence was starting to crumble, even if he wouldn't admit it. Pride was keeping him upright, but the foundation was giving way. He still believed he could control everything with money. There's no problem that money can't solve, he told himself. But fate was preparing a blow that would leave him powerless against life itself, something that all the gold in the world couldn't buy. Deep down, there was a restlessness he couldn't explain, a feeling that something bigger was about to happen. His intuition was screaming, but he silenced it with parties, contracts, and new acquisitions. It was only a matter of time before reality caught up with him. And fate was not slow to act. Within a few weeks, a tragedy would occur, forever changing how that man saw the world and tearing down the wall of arrogance that protected him. It was a rainy morning when the blow fell. The millionaire was leaving his mansion for a crucial meeting when a car accident shattered his powerful routine. The impact was violent, leaving him injured and confused. For the first time in years, he felt vulnerable, trapped between twisted metal and with no control over the situation. The news spread quickly. Newspapers ran headlines about the accident. Investors grew nervous, and hidden enemies seized the opportunity to move in. While the millionaire's body recovered in the hospital, his financial empire came under relentless attack. It was as if everyone had been waiting for him to fall. Immobilized, he tried to give orders by phone, but his voice no longer carried the same weight. Partners and allies pretended to be concerned, but were secretly plotting against him. The arrogance that once inspired fear now generated contempt. For the first time, the millionaire realized he was surrounded by opportunists. In the hospital corridors, few people cared about him beyond his employees, and among them, the humble employee stood out. Despite the recent humiliation, he was one of the first to offer help, organizing paperwork, handling details, and even visiting discreetly to check on his condition. It was something nobody expected. The millionaire, however, resisted accepting the help. He still tried to assert his authority, even lying in a hospital bed with a fragile body and a tired voice. He tried to buy off doctors, speed up treatments, and demand obedience. But all he received were cold looks and standard procedural replies. In that place, his money was worth less than he had ever imagined.
Meanwhile, his company was beginning to collapse. Contracts were being canceled, clients were pulling their investments, and rumors of bankruptcy were spreading. The millionaire watched his golden kingdom crumble and was powerless to stop it. The feeling of helplessness ate away at him more than the physical pain. During sleepless nights, he remembered the employee he had humiliated. The image of that scene returned like an open wound. Each day, he saw more clearly that, despite the humiliation he had inflicted, that man kept quietly showing up to help. This contradiction troubled him deeply. A dilemma grew inside him. How could someone he had treated so poorly still care? His mind, used to calculations and contracts, couldn't understand this kind of generosity. For him, everything had a price, but this gesture seemed to have none. In the loneliness of the hospital, Surrounded by machines and silence, he began to feel something unfamiliar. Fear. Fear of losing not just his fortune, but his very life. And in that fear, a cruel truth emerged. He wasn't as powerful as he had always believed. Fate had struck its blow, and the arrogant millionaire, for the first time, was faced with the bare, harsh reality. His life depended on the person he valued the least. In the hospital, the days dragged on like a silent torture. The millionaire tried to regain control of his life, but found himself limited by crutches and medical restrictions. His mind screamed orders, but his body no longer responded the same way. His pride, once so solid, began to crack in the face of the fragility he refused to accept. He called his lawyers, directors, and partners incessantly, demanding immediate solutions. But the answer was always the same: "We're doing everything we can." Behind the polite words, he sensed a growing distance. Slowly, he understood that his absence had created a vacuum, allowing others to seize power. The world hadn't stopped for him. He tried to solve problems with money, as he always had. He offered bonuses, extra payments, promises of rewards. Yet his proposals no longer had any impact. The respect bought with cash was evaporating as quickly as his influence was dissolving. The millionaire couldn't stand this powerlessness. Amid the chaos, a silent rage took hold of him. His wounded pride turned into hostility. He took it out on the nurses, yelled at the doctors, and even at visitors. The arrogance that had once sustained him was now a burden that isolated him even further. No one wanted to be near him. And it was in this setting that the humble employee reappeared. Without any fanfare, he walked into the room bringing organized documents and news from the company. He spoke calmly, offering practical help. The millionaire looked at him with disdain, but deep down, he knew this was the only sincere presence among a crowd of opportunists. Even so, his reaction was to reject him. "I don't need you," he said, his voice heavy with pride. But the employee wasn't offended. He simply replied, "One day, sir, you will realize you need someone, and I'll be here." Those words echoed louder than he cared to admit.
The nights in the hospital grew darker. Surrounded by medication and loneliness, the millionaire wrestled with thoughts he'd never had before. He asked himself if he was truly invincible, or if his entire life had been built on a fragile illusion. But he would push the idea away, clinging to the last shred of his pride. The employee kept showing up quietly, never expecting thanks. Paradoxically, this gesture bothered the millionaire even more. How could someone he had looked down on maintain such dignity? He couldn't understand it. His wounded pride stopped him from recognizing the other man's value. But deep down, a seed had begun to sprout. The millionaire wasn't ready to accept it yet, but something inside him was changing, even against his will. And fate, patient, waited for the right moment to cross their paths again, this time even more intensely. Despite all the contempt he had suffered, the humble employee remained loyal. Others saw him as a fool for still helping the millionaire, but he believed that life always repays good deeds, sooner or later. He wasn't doing it for a reward, but because it was the right thing to do. And that character would soon become essential. While the millionaire's partners abandoned him, the employee took on small responsibilities. He organized contracts, negotiated with clients, and kept parts of the company from collapsing. He did it all quietly, without expecting any recognition. It was as if he was single-handedly holding up a wall that was about to crumble. From afar, the millionaire watched. He wouldn't admit it out loud, but he was starting to see the difference. With each passing day,
The employee was becoming more indispensable. Even so, he resisted thanking him or acknowledging his importance. Pride still had him in its grip. One morning, the employee arrived at the hospital early and found the millionaire in crisis over news of more financial losses. Instead of humiliating him, he offered calm words and practical solutions. "We can still save some of what's yours, but you need to trust someone other than yourself." It sounded like a direct challenge to the millionaire's ego. Anger took over, and in a burst of arrogance, he yelled, "You're just a mediocre employee. Don't tell me what to do." The silence that followed was heavy. But contrary to expectations, the employee didn't react with hatred. He just sighed and replied, "Even if I'm mediocre, I'm still here, while everyone else is gone." Those words pierced the millionaire's armor. For the first time, he had no immediate comeback. His hardened expression faltered for a few seconds, revealing the hidden fragility. Something inside him broke, even as he tried to deny it. Over time, he realized that each visit from the employee was a disguised relief. He wouldn't admit it, but he found himself waiting for those calm conversations, for that steady presence. It was as if in the middle of the chaos, there was one point of stability. And that point was the very man he had always despised.
The employee knew change would take time, but he didn't give up. He was convinced that even the hardest heart could be transformed. And little by little, he began to see cracks appearing in the millionaire's wall of arrogance. Fate had brought together two opposite lives, one sustained by pride, the other by humility. And soon, this contrast would reach its limit, forcing both men to face truths that would change their stories forever. The millionaire still fought against the idea of depending on anyone. With every visit from the humble employee, he tried to reassert his superiority. He made sharp comments, tested his patience, and reminded him he was just an employee. It was his way of clinging to his last shred of pride. But deep down, he no longer had the strength to keep up such resistance. The doctors recommended rest, but he insisted on meddling in his business affairs. He tried to give orders over the phone, but no one responded with the same urgency as before. Partners and associates already saw him as a lost cause. This isolation only increased his frustration. He who was used to giving orders to everyone was now being ignored. The employee remained steadfast, even in the face of these provocations. He responded calmly, organized papers, and brought reports. He didn't retaliate against the insults, he simply demonstrated patience. This behavior baffled the millionaire, because he couldn't understand how someone he had humiliated so badly still stayed by his side. On a rainy afternoon, the millionaire tried to get up by himself to prove he was still in control. But his body wouldn't obey. He fell heavily, unable to get up. The employee rushed to help him, offering a hand. He refused for a few moments, trying to drag himself, but finally gave in. That scene marked a silent turning point, the first gesture of acceptance. Even after the fall, he tried to downplay the situation. "I don't need your pity," he said, his voice choked. The employee replied firmly, "It's not pity, it's humanity." Those words echoed in his mind all night, disturbing his sleep. For the first time, he felt that maybe he had been wrong. His pride was still holding on, but it was beginning to show signs of wear and tear. More and more, his dependence on the employee was becoming evident. He hated it, but he couldn't deny it. The millionaire was facing a reality he had never imagined. He needed the very person he had always considered insignificant. In the days that followed, he tested the employee's patience even further. He created situations to measure his loyalty, asked provocative questions, and even offered him money in exchange for his silence.
But the humble man refused all offers, reaffirming that he wasn't there for personal gain. This stance left the millionaire confused. For years, he had believed everyone had a price. Now, faced with someone who couldn't be bought, he felt vulnerable. It was like confronting an uncomfortable truth. Perhaps money wasn't the measure of all things.
Resistance and denial still ruled him, but a crack had opened in his armor, and fate, patient as ever, was preparing the next blow, one that would make it impossible for him to hide his fragility any longer. One morning, the millionaire received news that one of his oldest business ventures had gone bankrupt. The loss was enormous and irreversible. He tried to keep his composure, but he couldn't hold back an explosion of rage. He threw things against the wall, yelled at the nurses, and in his despair, blamed everyone. The humble employee was the only one who stayed by his side, in silence. When the fury passed, the millionaire found himself exhausted, with tears he hadn't shed in years. He tried to hide them, but the employee walked into the room at the exact moment he was crying. He expected mockery or pity, but all he heard was, "Crying doesn't make you weak, it just makes you human." Those words struck him like lightning. It was the first time anyone had dared to speak to him as an equal, without fear, without flattery. That simple phrase, said with sincerity, opened a breach in his pride. For the first time, he felt the desire to listen instead of just giving orders. He didn't admit it out loud, but something inside him had shifted. That same day, the employee brought an unexpected gesture. Instead of reports and documents, he brought a small homemade meal. "The hospital food isn't good. My wife made this." The millionaire, used to sophisticated dishes, hesitated, but he ended up trying it. The simple flavor moved him in a way he couldn't explain. That gesture awakened old memories from his childhood, before the wealth, when his mother used to prepare meals with care, memories he had buried under layers of arrogance. For a moment, he remembered a time when he was just a boy, not an emperor of money. The breach in his pride was widening. He still tried to maintain the mask, but he was starting to see the employee in a new light, not as a disposable worker, but as someone genuine, offering what no one else had the courage to offer: honesty and humanity. That night, lying in bed, he reflected in silence. He wondered why this man, despite being treated so poorly, still cared. The answer escaped his cold logic, but for the first time, he wasn't trying to buy an explanation. He was simply accepting the doubt. The following days were marked by small conversations. The millionaire began to listen more, even if he pretended indifference. The employee spoke about his family, his daily struggles, and simple values. Each word planted seeds in hardened ground that was slowly becoming fertile. The millionaire wouldn't say it out loud, but he was changing. He still resisted, he still denied it, but the wall of arrogance now had an opening, and through that opening came a light he had never wanted to see before.
The millionaire believed that once he left the hospital, he would reclaim his position of power. But when he tried to reconnect with partners and allies, he was met with a cruel reality. Many had moved on for good. The invitations had stopped, the phones weren't ringing, and even people close to him seemed indifferent. It was as if he had ceased to exist in the very world he had once idolized. In meetings, he was no longer greeted with applause, but with cold stares. Those who used to flatter him now openly jockeyed for his former position without hesitation. He discovered that many of his so-called friends had betrayed him during his absence, signing contracts behind his back. The loyalty he thought he commanded was just disguised self-interest. This fall from grace was painful. For the first time, he found himself alone in a crowd of opportunists. He tried to use his authority, but his words now carried no weight. The man who was once feared was now being ignored. His world of appearances was crumbling, revealing a void he could no longer hide. In this bleak scenario, the humble employee stood out even more. While everyone else drifted away, he remained there, steady. He wasn't seeking advantage or demanding anything in return. He was simply keeping his word to be present. The contrast was so stark that the millionaire could no longer ignore it. One quiet night, he reflected on the people who had surrounded him. He realized he had never had true friends, only temporary allies. Every bit of applause had been bought, every smile rehearsed, and now, without his absolute wealth, it was all falling apart. All that remained was the employee he had humiliated. His anger gave way to a strange feeling of emptiness. For the first time, he wondered if he had wasted his entire life chasing an illusion. He questioned whether power was truly worth anything in the face of the loneliness that now consumed him. Noticing this quiet transformation, the employee made his presence felt more strongly, not with speeches or judgments, but with small gestures, a word of support, some practical help, a respectful silence. It was in these details that the millionaire found something he had never had in his entire life: sincerity. The masks had fallen. The millionaire, who always believed he was surrounded by powerful people, discovered that his real companionship came from the person he had valued the least. And this revelation shook the last remaining foundation of his arrogance. He could no longer deny it. He was changing, even if slowly. His pride was still resisting, but his loneliness was pushing him down an inevitable path of transformation. One afternoon, while reviewing documents brought by the employee, the millionaire stumbled upon something unexpected. Among old papers, he found records that revealed a detail he never could have imagined. That employee had secretly helped him years ago, without ever being acknowledged.
It was about an occasion when the company had almost collapsed. The employee, who was still in a junior position at the time, had worked through entire nights to correct critical errors in some contracts. His quiet dedication had prevented a disaster. But no one ever knew, and the credit was given solely to the millionaire. When he confronted the employee about it, the man confirmed the story with simple honesty. "I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because it was the right thing to do." The millionaire fell silent, unsure how to react. For the first time, he couldn't find the words to uphold his arrogance. He felt small in the face of that revelation. The memory of this past event haunted him. While he had been boasting about victories, someone else had been quietly carrying part of the load for him. And even so, that person had never demanded anything in return. This discovery exposed the falseness of his entire worldview, where he believed everyone was only out for themselves. Shame washed over him. He mentally replayed the scene of public humiliation he had inflicted on the employee. He now understood that he had wounded not just a worker, but a man of honor who had already saved him in silence. The guilt crushed him in a way that even his financial losses couldn't. That night, he couldn't sleep. The employee's face appeared in his mind, accompanied by the question that wouldn't leave his head. How can someone I treated so poorly still stand by me? There was no answer, only the weight of his own conscience. For the first time, he felt the desire to apologize, but his pride was still holding him back. He was afraid of looking weak, afraid of losing the last shred of his authority. Even so, the impulse was there, growing stronger each day. It was an internal battle between the man he had always been and the man he could become. The employee, for his part, never brought the subject up again. He continued his routine of loyalty without demanding gratitude. This attitude only intensified the millionaire's inner conflict, who couldn't bear being faced with such greatness in light of his own smallness. The revealed past acted like a mirror, showing the millionaire the image he had always refused to see, that of a man who had built his life on pride and contempt, without realizing that his true strength had come from those he underestimated. And that mirror would be impossible to break. The transformation, though still silent, had now become inevitable. The millionaire's last hopes crumbled rapidly. A major international contract, which could have saved a part of his fortune, was canceled without warning. His assets began to be seized, and newspapers ran headlines about his downfall. The man once seen as a titan of business was now just a man in ruins. The news spread like wildfire. The people who had flattered him disappeared. Invitations vanished, and even family members kept their distance, afraid of being dragged down with him. The millionaire, accustomed to being revered, was now met with looks of scorn and indifference. The world he once dominated had abandoned him without mercy.
In the loneliness of his increasingly empty mansion, he walked the halls like a ghost. Every painting, every luxury item seemed to mock him, a reminder of the empire he had lost. He felt a weight in his chest, not just from the bankruptcy, but from the emotional void he had never wanted to face. He discovered that without his wealth, there was nothing left to hold his life together. The humble employee remained by his side, even amidst the chaos. He offered support, brought him less harsh news, and even helped maintain the millionaire's dignity in front of the few people who still came to visit. This gesture was a direct affront to his pride, but it was also the only flicker of hope he had left. On a stormy night, the millionaire found himself alone in front of a mirror. The reflection showed an aged, tired man with empty eyes. There, he silently admitted to himself that he had lost everything. His pride, once his greatest weapon, was now just a prison. And for the first time, he murmured to himself, "Maybe I was wrong." That phrase, even though whispered in secret, was the key to a new chapter. The wall of arrogance was about to collapse completely. But first, he would have to face the most painful moment, acknowledging that he had hurt the one who deserved it the least. The weight of the public humiliation he had inflicted on the employee crushed him. Every memory was accompanied by shame. He wondered how anyone could endure so much contempt and still stay by the side of the person who hurt them. The answer terrified him. There was a greatness in humility that he had never understood. With tears he could no longer control, he knelt on the floor in the empty living room. The arrogant millionaire had finally hit rock bottom. There were no more fortunes to hold him up, no more masks to hide behind. All that remained was a broken man facing the truth he had always refused. He was nothing on his own. His final fall wasn't just financial, it was spiritual, emotional, human. He had lost what was most precious to him, the illusion that money was enough. Now all that was left was to discover if he had the courage to seek redemption. The next morning, the millionaire asked to speak with the employee. His voice, once firm and arrogant, now sounded shaky. It was as if every word was a heavy burden. For several minutes he hesitated, unable to say what he needed to say most. Pride and shame were locked in a silent battle inside him. Finally, with tears in his eyes, he let out the words he never imagined he would say. "I was wrong to treat you the way I did. I humiliated you. I looked down on you, and even so, you stayed by my side. I don't know why, but please forgive me." The silence that followed seemed to last forever. It was the first time the millionaire had ever bowed down before anyone. The employee, moved, took a moment to respond. He saw before him not the arrogant boss, but a broken man, willing to acknowledge his failures. "Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, but it can change the future," he said with serenity. His words were like a balm to the millionaire's wounded heart.
That moment marked an irreversible change. The pride that had imprisoned him for years dissolved into tears. He was no longer trying to assert his authority, but to rebuild the bridges he had burned. For the first time, he felt relief in admitting his own humanity. His request for forgiveness wasn't just for the employee. In the days that followed, he tried to make amends with family members, former colleagues, and even people he had wronged in past business deals. Many didn't accept his words, but he didn't give up. He understood he had nothing left to lose, except the chance to start over. The employee stayed by his side, now not out of obligation, but by choice. He saw in the millionaire a new version of the man, more human, more fragile, but also more genuine. This relationship, built amidst the chaos, was becoming the foundation of an unlikely friendship. The millionaire, feeling the power of forgiveness, experienced something he hadn't felt in a long time: gratitude. Not for wealth or power, but for having someone who believed in him when he didn't even believe in himself. It was a new feeling, one that brought with it an unexpected hope. There was still a long road ahead. The wounds of the past wouldn't disappear overnight, but in that moment, the millionaire knew he had taken the first step toward a true transformation. The man who always believed he was above everyone else was now humbled by humility itself. And he finally discovered that the greatest wealth isn't in gold, but in the heart of someone who knows how to forgive. After asking for forgiveness, the millionaire began to see the employee in a completely different light. No longer as just an employee, but as someone whose strength came from dignity and kindness. This new perspective made him reflect every day on how much time he had wasted, trapped by his pride. One afternoon, during a sincere conversation, the millionaire asked, "Why are you still here after everything I did?" The employee smiled serenely and replied, "Because I believe every man can change, and because my conscience won't allow me to abandon someone in need." Those words struck the millionaire right in the heart. With tears in his eyes, he extended his hand. It wasn't a gesture of command, but of reconciliation. The employee, deeply moved, shook it firmly. That handshake didn't just seal the forgiveness, it marked the birth of a true friendship, forged in the fire of adversity. The millionaire, who used to humiliate and scorn, now allowed himself to listen. He began to ask about the employee's life, his family, his struggles. He discovered simple stories, yet full of love and perseverance, which inspired him more than any business meeting ever had. This connection brought a new feeling: peace. For the first time in decades, the millionaire experienced the simple pleasure of honest conversation, without masks or hidden agendas. It was as if he was rediscovering what it truly meant to be human.
The employee, for his part, saw a genuine transformation in the millionaire. There were still traces of pride, but they were now being overshadowed by his growing humility. He knew the change wouldn't be easy, but he also knew that a fundamental, irreversible shift had already occurred. This unlikely friendship began to attract attention from others. The employee's family and acquaintances were surprised to see the millionaire spending time in simple settings, sharing modest meals and listening to everyday stories. It was a stark contrast to the cold, distant man that he had been before. But it wasn't just friendship that was blooming. Inside the millionaire, a new purpose was emerging: to rebuild his life not on power, but on humanity. And the employee would be his compass on this journey. The extended hand, once a symbol of superiority, now represented humility. And in that gesture was the silent promise of a new path. As the months passed, The millionaire began to change his habits. He sold off some of his luxurious possessions, not out of immediate need, but because he no longer saw the point in accumulating them. He discovered a pleasure in simplicity, walking in public squares, talking with ordinary people, sharing home-cooked meals. The luxury that had once been his golden prison now seemed superfluous. Little by little, he rebuilt family ties. He sought to get closer to his children and relatives who had drifted away because of his coldness. Many were resistant, remembering past hurts, but some began to see sincerity in his actions. Forgiveness didn't come easily, but he was willing to wait as long as necessary. The employee remained by his side, not as an employee, but as a friend and advisor. Together, they began visiting poor communities, quietly helping families in need. The millionaire, who was used to donating only for newspaper headlines, now did so in silence. No cameras, no speeches. The difference was clear. He wasn't seeking recognition, but transformation. This change, however, did not go unnoticed. His former partners accused him of being crazy, saying he was wasting what little he had left. But he didn't care. He had already understood that true wealth isn't found in bank accounts, but in the impact one leaves on people's lives. At a simple community event, the millionaire was caught by surprise. A child hugged him and said, "Thank you for caring about us." Those pure, simple words moved him deeply. He cried in public without shame, something he would never have done in his former life. Each day was a battle against his old self, but he stood firm. His pride still whispered, trying to lure him back, but now there was a stronger voice, that of the humility he had learned from the employee.
The friendship between the two men grew stronger. The barrier of boss and employee was gone. What remained was mutual respect, trust, and genuine loyalty. The millionaire was finally experiencing what he had always searched for in vain: sincere companionship. The man who once humiliated others was now helping them. The man who looked down on others was now learning from them. He was a new man, still a work in progress, but already unrecognizable from his past self. And deep down, he knew this transformation wasn't just for himself, but for the hope of leaving a different legacy, that of someone who, even late in life, chose to change. Months had passed since the millionaire's fall. His life, once surrounded by luxury and arrogance, now followed a simple rhythm, but one full of meaning. People no longer saw him as the cold, untouchable man, but as someone who had learned to care. For many, it was surprising to witness such a transformation. On a sunny afternoon, he was walking with the employee through a community they regularly helped. Children ran along the dirt streets, families smiled with gratitude, and the millionaire watched it all with a sense of peace. This scene, so far from the luxurious halls he once frequented, was now what gave his life purpose. He sat on a makeshift bench and stayed quiet, just observing. In his heart, he felt a different kind of weight. It was no longer the weight of arrogance, but of responsibility. He realized that even with limited resources, he could still change lives, and that was the greatest wealth anyone could have. The employee by his side smiled. "You see what happens when we look beyond ourselves?" he asked. The millionaire replied with sincerity, "I spent my whole life blind. I thought money was the treasure, but the real treasure was always right here in people's hearts." At that moment, a child approached him and handed him a flower. A simple gesture, but it moved him deeply. He held the flower as if it were the most valuable gift he had ever received. And in a way, it was, because it symbolized sincere recognition, something no fortune had ever given him. He stood up and looked around. He no longer saw employees or subordinates, but human beings just like himself. He finally understood that arrogance had been his prison. True freedom was in acknowledging his own fragility and learning to love. His old partners and friends never came back, but it no longer mattered. Now he had something greater: true respect, genuine friendship, and the chance to leave a legacy of kindness. He discovered that life isn't measured by what we accumulate, but by what we share. Standing beside the employee, now a loyal friend, he promised to never go back to being the man he was. He knew the temptation of pride might return, but he also knew he had someone to remind him of who he had become. And that friendship was the anchor that kept him steady. As the sun set that evening, he felt a peace he had never known. It wasn't the glitter of gold or the sound of bought applause. It was the calm of someone who had finally understood the meaning of life. The arrogant millionaire had died. In his place, a renewed man was born, one who had finally discovered that the true treasure isn't in vaults or contracts, but in the heart of someone who learns to love and be loved. And you, do you believe the real treasure is in the heart and not the wallet? Then subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications. Stories like this one will change the way you see life.